Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned, I'm responsible for research and development at BBraun Aesculap in our surgical technologies division. And I'm here to hopefully contribute an informative or at least interesting contribution to the discussion of smart medical systems, specifically based on the latest developments in 3D endoscopic visualization. Just a brief outline here. I'll introduce quickly BBraun Aesculap, a very brief history of stereoscopy and endoscopy. Why 3D, this migration from 2D to 3D that's taking place, what are the prevailing 3D endoscopic visualization platforms, and then latest developments and emerging technologies with a short summary and hopefully time for questions at the end. In 2014, BBraun is a worldwide leading healthcare organization with about 5.2 billion euros in sales. At a glance, we employ 50,000 people worldwide in 61 countries. 3.3 billion euros invested in the past 5 years, 219 million euros in research and development, and we currently fund about 100 corporate social responsibility projects. We're organized into 4 divisions. Hospital care, which deals with drug delivery systems, sterile fluids, those types of products. Our Aesculap division, which I'll say a word about in a moment. Outpatient market, and Avidum, which deals with the kidney dialysis market. So Aesculap, the Aesculap division. Aesculap was founded in 1867 by a gentleman named Gottfried Jetter in the town of Tuttlingen. We are the oldest and largest continuously operating surgical instrument company in the world. We focus on products and services for all surgical processes, including interventional radiology, from surgical instruments and implants to suture materials, with a caveat that we don't focus on ophthalmic surgery, so sorry. Since the 1980s, we have, however, been actively involved in the surgical endoscopy market. So very briefly, stereopsis, or how we see in stereo. Simple diagram here. The left eye perceives an image, sends a signal to the brain relative to the left eye's position. The right eye does the same. The brain processes each of those images at the same time, takes into account the slight differences, and from those differences creates a three-dimensional representation that includes distance and depth perception. Those are very key. This was first described by Sir Charles Wheatstone in 1838, and not surprisingly, the same gentleman created the first model of a mirror stereoscope. This is a short evolution of stereoscopic visualization devices. Later came the lenticular stereoscope from David Brewster, which was the first to use lenses. There's a familiar item there that the Viewmaster, many may recall that device. Also a stereoscopic viewer that was quite popular and created sort of virtual tourism. In the 1950s, through motion pictures, there was a popularization of 3D motion pictures. And then in 2005, a resurgence of 3D interest following the release of the film Avatar. What that did is it sparked a trend for more and more 3D visualization in consumer devices, and that trend continues today and continues to drive innovation. On to endoscopy. The first registered endoscopic practical endoscope is credited to Philip Bozzini, his invention of the Lichtleiter, or the light conductor, an invention for viewing internal parts and diseases. Later, about a half century, Basil Hershowitz, Lawrence Curtis, and Wilbur Peters filed their first patent for a flexible fiber optic endoscope. And then in the 1960s, a gentleman named Harold Hopkins created the first rigid rod lens endoscope. This was quite a breakthrough because it solved the critical problem of low resolution and poor image quality. Had the added benefit of incorporating a very robust design from parts that were easy to manufacture. And so through further innovation and collaboration with Karl Storz, you could fairly say that it revolutionized the field of medical optics, at least medical optics with respect to endoscopy. I'm excluding microscopy from the discussion. So now, why 3D? Why this current transition that's taking place? There's plenty of systems, 2D systems. Surgeons have become comfortable using them over the past 3 decades. So why all of a sudden 3D? Is this bells and whistles? Are these just new gimmicks and gadgets, technology-driven? Yes and no. Fundamentally, we have the importance of haptics together with optics. Haptics is to touch what optics is to sight. And there is the concept of exteroperception, or the ability to perceive your environment, along with proprioception, which is the sense of self, or where you are in your environment, or typical example, where your hands are with respect to your environment. A fundamental problem with keyhole or endoscopic surgery is that it limits both visual and haptic reference and context. And by way of simple example, we all played the game when we were children, on a pirate ship, your telescope. If you were to do that right now, the first thing you would notice is that it severely limits your context and your reference. The second thing it does is it takes away depth, right? I can illustrate this if little audience participation as well, to get the sense of what the difference between 2D and 3D is. So if you put your hands aside, taking into account your neighbor, and try to touch your fingers above your head, my guess is if you touch, you're lucky, right? Now, if you do this in front of your face, my guess is every time you'll touch your fingertips. That's the difference between 2D and 3D. It's really quite simple. It's a stunning difference, but 3D visualization, anyway, going back, exteroperception and proprioception are essential mechanisms of perception, and they need to be either replaced or artificially replicated when we take them away, and that's what essentially what 2D endoscopy has done. So 3D visualization is simply superior to that of 2D. It facilitates these characteristics of perception. It's how we see the world. It's how we've seen the world forever. And so I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, for maximum benefit of surgeons and patients, any form of aided visualization, such as endoscopy, should also be in 3D. So coming to the existing prevailing endoscopic platforms, I would be remiss if I didn't mention our own product. There are others as well. Ours is the Aesculap Einstein Vision System. We're in a very crowded and well-known space with Karl Storz and Olympus Medical and Richard Wolf and ConMed. These are just some. There are many others. But what sets us apart right now, and where we are leaders in the state-of-the-art in technology, is we do use a Hopkins-type endoscope, which simply has 2 optical channels for stereoscopic signals, 3D camera control unit, and 3D monitor. But we have native full 3D resolution, or excuse me, HD resolution, and lightweight, glasses, 3D glasses. There's obviously other technologies for creating 3D visualization, shutter technology as one, but the polarized glasses, lightweight, are the least obtrusive and the most highly preferred with respect to end users. Another area is autofocus. Our system keeps the entire field of view in sharp focus at all times. You can imagine under magnification or under visualization, anybody who's worked under a microscope knows that you can quickly come in and out of focus. Again, when you're working in a keyhole, that's critical to always have a certain depth in focus, and then the entire screen in focus. An additional technology is this anti-fog technology. I come from the San Francisco area. Anyone who knows that area knows that a lot of flights get delayed because of fog. So the best visualization systems in the world can be brought to a standstill simply because you can't see what you're looking at or what your target is. So ensuring that through the temperature differentials of instruments and the body, that there's no fog that's obscuring the endoscope is a tremendous benefit. And then finally, an innovative sterile barrier concept which eliminates the need to sterilize the endoscope. I mention this because the sterilization process is the single biggest contributor to the degradation of the optics in in endoscopes. And while that may be good news for those who provide services to repair and refurbish endoscopes, overall speaking, in the economics of hospital procurement, it's perceived as negative. So we've replaced the need to do that with a very simple concept of sterile drape. So on to the latest technologies and developments. As with any system or solution that is based on technology integration, there's obviously lots of points where innovation can drive the end solution. Here we're talking about 3D cameras, for instance. And I'm by no means an expert in digital image signals or processing, but the latest trend is in 3-chip CMOS semiconductor-based image sensors from companies like Sony and Toshiba. These provide improved color reproduction and resolution, which is truer to the original object, and therefore better than the prevailing generation of 1-chip sensors. CMOS also has the added benefit of being easier and less costly to manufacture, so there's an economic benefit. This against charge-coupled devices, which had been a previous benchmark for image quality. Another recent development is the single lens. Imagine I just talked about the telescope. There are actually now single lens 3D cameras that through some very interesting technology can create a stereoscopic signal. One such company has already created a 5mm endoscope, stereo endoscope. And the smaller diameter, of course, opens the door to additional surgical disciplines such as neurosurgery and ENT, where a 10mm diameter scope is simply not practicable. And then finally, this notion of universal CCU platform. This is simply an issue of, to put it bluntly, between backwards and forwards compatibility. Hospitals have large investments in equipment inventory, and so as we tend to push the technology farther ahead, we have to be mindful of those investments that they make. We can't simply replace one with the other. So this is a way to ensure that their camera systems are compatible forward and backward. Anybody watching the World Cup these days? You'll have seen perhaps along the sidelines Sony advertising 4K. What is 4K? 4K is the next level of resolution in digital imaging beyond full high definition. So we're talking about ultra definition here. 4K is simply, if you look at the little box here, it's four of those make up this one here. So it's 4 times the resolution of current full HD. We're also now talking about 8K systems. Cooperation in Japan between Hitachi and a company called Shinko have already put together the first 8K system. That's 16 times the resolution of full HD. That's an incredible amount of digital data, of course. So the processing of that digital data becomes a bit tricky, and the storage of that digital data as well, because it is vast amounts of data. A caveat here is also, I'm told by our experts that 4K is about what the human eye can distinguish. So anything beyond that really truly could be perhaps technology for technology's sake. But again, with the advanced up to 4K in resolution, we're talking about depth of field control that could eliminate the need to reposition the camera during or the endoscope during the procedure, and that has great benefit for the user. In terms of endoscopes, there's some interesting things happening of moving the sensor in from the camera head into the endoscope. It can reduce the head size of the camera, enables it to become one unit. Chip-in-tip technology, that's moving it all the way to the very end of the endoscope, the image sensor, such as in the single lens that I mentioned before. This allows for depth of focus across the entire working area and a range of working distances. You can imagine I've been talking about more rigid endoscopes, but this has application as well in flexible endoscopes and has the great benefit of no lens in the shaft, like a rod lens system, which means low maintenance and lower cost. Again, coming from the perspective of technology integration, we're looking down a hole. We need to put some kind of illumination into that hole in order to be able to see. The whole thing is predicated on light. And these image sensors translating a light signal into an electrical signal. The standard right now is a xenon-based light source. Has some drawbacks in terms of the heat that it produces, does provide very bright light, of course, but light-emitting diode technology has found its way into the light sources that are used now, so LEDs. They're efficient, long life, and inexpensive compared to xenon lamps. Typically, they'll combine 4 LEDs, ultra-bright LEDs, red, green, blue, and violet or purple. The relative intensities now with digital controls of the light sources or of the individual LEDs can be adjusted to provide varying levels of white light and or colored illumination. My experts tell me as well that while LED technology doesn't provide quite as high a level of intensity as the xenon lamps, we're in the 90%, perhaps even soon 95% range, which is to the human eye essentially undetectable, the difference. So great benefits here, including the capability of contrast enhancement by fine-tuning the different light levels and tuning them exactly to the tissue type and the light absorption characteristics of the tissue. And that has great benefit for direct visualization of pathologies and for differences in tissue. There's at least one booth out here dealing with augmented reality. Augmented reality, again, another limb on the tree of this technology integration. This is the projection of preoperative images onto the real-time intraoperative field of view. So you can imagine that when you're working in a keyhole and you've taken away the ability of the surgeon to palpate or to use his or her fingers to touch tissue. That's that sense that's missing. And that sense is, from my early days working with surgeons, the surgeons always tell you the most important tool in their toolbox is their hands. And when they can't feel a tumor or when they can't feel for differences in rigidity in a vessel, they don't know where the pathology is. So augmented reality takes away that guesswork by defining where it is through a preoperative image set and then projecting that in real time into the operative field of view. Fluorescence is the final technology that I'll talk about. It's already being used. ICG, or indocyanine green, and 5-ALA are already in use. This is the injection of a contrast dye that fluoresces under certain lighting conditions, under direct visualization. ICG is typically used for vessels and highly vascular tumors, whereas 5-ALA is more for tumor depiction under specific lighting conditions such as microscopy and ultraviolet light. And then finally, autofluorescence is finding there's interesting things happening here, and that is that certain tissue types have autofluorescence or autofluorescing characteristics under certain lighting conditions. And so then you can eliminate the need to have to inject any contrast dye simply by detecting the signal under the right light conditions. And again, for for identification of pathologies and differences in tumors or differences in tissue, this has become very beneficial. I'll finish with a quote here from Professor Doll, who is the director of the Cardiac Surgery Sauna Clinic in Stuttgart. Professor Doll was the first surgeon to perform total endoscopic tricuspid valve surgery using the Einstein 3D system. Quote, he said, using the 3D imaging system in such a great quality enables me to work more precisely, to reduce patients' pain by using a soft tissue retractor only, and to have high confidence and security in placing stitches around the annulus. The Aesculap 3D Einstein Vision System will lead to less traumatic and painful surgeries and to a reduction of operating time with an unprecedented ease of use and efficiency. Those are the statements that we like to hear. I can think of no better reason for pushing the state of the art and science towards better patient outcomes. So in summary, 3D endoscopic visualization has already taken hold, has a strong foothold in surgery, has very important benefits over 2D that are not just technology driven, because most surgeons it's far more intuitive and presents a much lower learning curve and far greater precision. So further advances in camera and monitor technology, this is digital image processing 101, in endoscopes and light sources, and in augmented reality and fluorescence will continue to drive greater market penetration of 3D visualization systems. And I'm going to be really bold here with a prediction and say that within the next 5 years, we could easily see 3D replacing 2D as the benchmark in endoscopic surgery. The paradigm shift has already begun. So with that, thank you for your time.